The AIM-9B left the rail at 0947 hours on May 12, 1968. Lieutenant Commander John Nichols had everything right. His F-4 Phantom was 3,000 feet behind a MiG-17 over Thanh Hoa. The MiG was in a gentle left turn, no hard maneuvering. The Sidewinder's seeker head had locked. Nichols heard the growl in his headset that meant infrared acquisition. He squeezed the trigger. The missile corkscrewed left, lost track, and detonated 400 feet from the MiG. The North Vietnamese pilot probably didn't know he'd been shot at. Nichols fired his second Sidewinder 18 seconds later. Same geometry, maybe closer. That one went ballistic immediately and fell into the jungle. The MiG escaped. This happened constantly in 1968. Navy F-4 crews were firing Sparrows and Sidewinders at North Vietnamese fighters under conditions the weapons were designed for, and the missiles just failed. Not every time. Often enough that pilots stopped trusting them. The AIM-7 Sparrow had an 8% success rate through 1968. Pilots fired 340, got 27 kills. The AIM-9B was better, but not much. Nobody could explain why a heat-seeking missile would lose lock on a target that wasn't maneuvering hard. The real problem was deeper, and nobody wanted to say it out loud. Navy fighter pilots didn't know how to dogfight anymore. The doctrine since the late 1950s assumed long-range missile engagements against Soviet bombers. Guns were dead weight. Close-in maneuvering was obsolete. The F-4 Phantom reflected this philosophy perfectly. No internal cannon. Built around radar-guided Sparrows for beyond visual range kills. Then Vietnam happened, and the rules of engagement required visual identification before firing. So Navy crews were merging with MiGs at knife fighting range with missiles that didn't work and no training for close combat. The kill ratio reflected it. 1968, 2.3 American kills for every loss. In Korea, 15 years earlier, the ratio had been 10-1. The debrief after Nichols' mission was short. Equipment malfunction. Bad luck. Nothing systemic. But Captain Frank Ault was paying attention. He'd been collecting these reports for months. Ault worked at the Pentagon in the Office of Naval Operations, and his job was solving problems nobody else wanted to acknowledge. The Sidewinder and Sparrow failures weren't random. The pattern was clear if you looked at enough mission reports. Ault started asking questions. Why were missiles failing at parameters within their design envelope? Why were pilots merging with MiGs when doctrine said they should kill from 20 miles out? Why was the kill ratio collapsing? The answers terrified him. Navy fighter training was designed for a war that didn't exist. Pilots practiced intercepts against straight-flying bomber profiles. They never fought dissimilar aircraft. They never practiced one-versus-one maneuvering. Some pilots were entering combat over North Vietnam without ever flying against an adversary trying to kill them. By June 1968, Ault had enough ammunition to force a formal investigation. The Chief of Naval Operations authorized it personally. Ault would lead. His mission, figure out why Navy fighters were underperforming in Vietnam and fix it. The investigation took 8 months. What Ault found was worse than missiles. The Ault report landed on desks in January 1969. 242 pages. The executive summary was diplomatic. The body text was not. Ault had documented everything. Missile reliability issues, yes, but also training deficiencies that bordered on institutional negligence. Navy fighter pilots were graduating from RAG, replacement air group training, without ever fighting a dissimilar adversary. They practiced fleet air defense against simulated bombers flying predictable profiles. When they did practice air-to-air combat, it was against identical aircraft flown by wingmen who weren't trying very hard. The report used careful language, but the message was clear. The Navy had spent 15 years preparing for a nuclear war with the Soviet Union and forgot how to dogfight. Here's where the bureaucratic absurdity starts. The Navy's fighter community in 1969 was dominated by what pilots called the missile mafia, senior officers who'd built their careers around long-range intercepts and beyond visual range kills. These were the people making procurement decisions. They'd removed guns from the F-4. They'd designed training curricula around radar missiles. They'd convinced themselves that future air combat would happen at 40 miles, not 4,000 feet. Ault's report threatened their entire worldview. Some flag officers wanted it buried. One captain, I couldn't find his name but multiple sources reference him, argued that Vietnam was an anomaly and the kill ratio would improve once pilots got more experience with the weapon systems. Which was insane. Pilots were dying because their training was garbage, and this guy wanted more of the same. The fight played out over months. Ault had allies. Captain Dan Pedersen was one. He'd flown combat missions over North Vietnam and understood exactly what Ault's report was describing. Pedersen had been arguing for realistic adversary training since 1967. Nobody listened then. Now he had 242 pages of documentation backing him up. Pedersen pushed for something radical. Create a school specifically for air combat maneuvering. Teach fighter pilots how to fight dissimilar adversaries at close range. Use actual Soviet tactics, the maneuvers North Vietnamese pilots were using successfully against Navy F-4s. Make it vicious. Make it realistic. No more gentlemen's training flights where everybody goes home feeling good. The missile mafia hated this idea. They argued it was unnecessary, expensive, a distraction from the real mission of fleet air defense. One memo, declassified in 1996, described Pedersen's proposal as a revival of obsolete World War II dogfighting tactics incompatible with modern air warfare. That memo got written in February 1969. By March, the school existed anyway. Not because the missile mafia changed their minds, because the chief of naval operations was tired of the kill ratio and gave Pedersen authorization to proceed despite the objections. They called it the Navy Fighter Weapons School. Pilots called it TOPGUN. Official funding, $0 initially. Official aircraft allocation, none. Pedersen borrowed 4 Skyhawks from attack squadrons to simulate MiG-7s. He scrounged desk space at NAS Miramar. The first class started March 3, 1969 with 8 students and a curriculum Pedersen wrote on a legal pad. The syllabus covered what Navy training had ignored for 15 years. Dissimilar air combat tactics, energy management in turning fights, how to defeat specific Soviet maneuvers documented from gun camera footage and pilot debriefs. Everything was 1 versus 1 or 2 versus 2. No scripted engagements. The instructors were trying to kill you. Every graduate returned to their squadron as an instructor. That was the model. Train the trainers. Spread the knowledge before more pilots died doing things wrong. It worked faster than anyone expected. The first TOPGUN class graduated in May 1969. 8 pilots, 5 weeks of training. They went back to their squadrons and the kill ratio started climbing almost immediately. Not dramatically at first. 1969 wasn't a heavy combat year. Bombing halts and negotiations limited air-to-air opportunities. But the pilots who'd gone through Miramar were different. They flew differently. They set up engagements differently. When they merged with MiGs, they knew what they were doing. Pedersen kept refining the curriculum. The second class in June had 10 students. He added more A4s, borrowed an F-5 from the Air Force to simulate the MiG-21's performance envelope. The MiG-21 was faster and could outturn an F-4 in certain conditions. TOPGUN instructors replicated those conditions exactly. They'd studied North Vietnamese tactics from every available source. Gun camera footage, debriefs from returned POWs, CIA assessments. The instructors flew like North Vietnamese pilots flew. Aggressive, willing to merge, comfortable in slow-speed scissors fights where the F-4's weight became a liability. Students hated it initially. Getting beaten repeatedly by an instructor in an A4 was humiliating. The A4 was a subsonic attack jet. It had no business beating an F-4 in a dogfight. But it did, constantly. Because the instructor understood energy management and the student didn't. That was the lesson. Aircraft performance mattered, but pilot skill mattered more. A superior jet flown poorly loses to an inferior jet flown well. North Vietnamese pilots understood this. They'd been flying inferior aircraft successfully for years. Now Navy pilots were learning it too. By 1970, TOPGUN was producing 2 classes per month. The school had official funding, more instructors, a dedicated flight line at Miramar. Word spread through the fighter community. Every F-4 squadron wanted their best pilots going through the program. The training was exhausting. Students flew multiple sorties per day. Every flight was debriefed frame by frame using gun camera footage. Instructors were brutal during debriefs. If you made a mistake, they showed you the exact moment in the footage where you committed to a losing energy state. No excuses, no allowances for ego. Pilots who graduated came back different, confident. Some squadrons saw immediate improvements in their air-to-air performance during training exercises. The Top Gun graduates were winning engagements that looked impossible on paper. Then the war escalated again. December 1971. Peace negotiations collapsed. Nixon authorized renewed bombing of North Vietnam. Operation Linebacker started planning. The Navy knew what was coming. Large-scale strike packages deep into North Vietnamese airspace. Heavy MiG resistance. Exactly the environment where Top Gun training mattered. By early 1972, the program had graduated over 100 pilots. Not many in absolute terms. The Navy had thousands of fighter pilots, but those 100 were distributed across the fleet. Squadron combat instructors, flight leads, the people other pilots looked to during mission briefs. VF-96 had Randy Cunningham and Willie Driscoll, both Top Gun graduates. Cunningham had gone through in 1970, Driscoll in 1971. They'd flown together as pilot and RIO since then. Their squadron mates said they flew like the jet was telepathic. VF-51 had several graduates. VF-92 had 2, VF-103, VF-142. The distribution wasn't even, but the graduates were flying with every carrier in the Western Pacific. Linebacker operations started May 1972. The North Vietnamese Air Force scrambled to respond. They'd had 18 months of reduced air combat. Some of their pilots were rusty, others were new. None of them had faced what was about to hit them. Nguyen Van Coc joined the Vietnam People's Air Force 921st Fighter Regiment in June 1969. He was 23. He'd trained in the Soviet Union for 11 months. He'd flown the MiG-17 exactly the way his instructors taught him. Aggressive slashing attacks, use superior turn rate, force Americans into slow-speed fights where the F-4's weight worked against it. His first combat mission was July 1969. He survived. His wingman didn't. An F-4 from VF-142 shot him down with a Sidewinder during the merge. Bay didn't see it happen. He was defensive, trying to shake another Phantom. When he looked back, his wingman was gone. By 1970, Bay had 6 missions. No kills. He'd fired his cannons twice at F-4s outside effective range. The declassified Vietnamese records from this period are thin. What exists shows increasing concern about pilot losses versus replacement rates. Soviet advisors attached to the 921st noted morale problems. One report from October 1970 describes pilots as displaying reluctance to engage American formations. That's diplomatic phrasing. They were scared. The Americans were flying differently, more disciplined. They weren't committing to turning fights anymore unless they had energy advantage. Their formations were tighter. When MiGs tried the old slashing tactics, the F-4s had counters ready. Several Vietnamese pilots reported American fighters reversing into them. Aggressive maneuvers that shouldn't work for a heavy jet, but did somehow. The 921st lost 11 pilots between January and December 1970. They got 4 confirmed kills. That ratio was unsustainable, but the war kept going anyway. Bombing halts in 1971 gave the VPAF time to rebuild. New pilots arrived from training, older pilots got rest, maintenance improved. The Soviet Union sent additional MiG-21s. By December 1971, the 921st was back to operational strength, 60 pilots, maybe 40 mission-ready on any given day. Then the Americans came back. Linebacker started May 1972. The first week was chaos. American strike packages were massive, 30 to 40 aircraft supported by jamming planes and wild weasels targeting surface-to-air missile sites. The VPAF couldn't intercept everything. Ground controllers were prioritizing threats. sending MiGs toward the most valuable targets, trying to break up strike packages before they reached Hanoi or Haiphong. It wasn't working. The Americans were getting through. Their losses were minimal. When MiGs engaged them, the F-4 crews were killing them at rates that didn't make sense. May 6th, 2 MiG-21s down, no American losses. May 8th, 3 MiG-17 down, 1 F-4 damaged. May 10th was worse. The 921st scrambled 16 MiGs that morning, various flights. Bay was flying a MiG-17. His mission was to intercept an Alpha strike targeting petroleum storage near Hai Duong. The strike package had F-4s from multiple squadrons. Bay's flight of 4 engaged 8 Phantoms at 10:15 hours. His flight leader died in the first 30 seconds. Sidewinder hit. Bay saw the flash, but didn't see the F-4 that fired. Another MiG went down less than a minute later. Bay was defensive immediately. He split from his remaining wingman and dove for the deck. He made it back to Kep Airfield with battle damage. Cannon rounds had hit his left wing. He couldn't explain how. Ground crews counted 12 MiGs lost that day. The Americans lost 2 aircraft, both to surface-to-air missiles, not fighters. Soviet advisors filed reports. The terminology was careful. Adverse engagement outcomes. Tactical difficulties against enhanced adversary capabilities. They knew what was happening. The Americans had changed something fundamental, and the VPAF couldn't adapt fast enough. Randy Cunningham and Willie Driscoll launched from USS Constellation at 0930 hours, May 10, 1972. VF-96, F-4, J, Phantom Bureau number 157267. Call sign Showtime 100. Their mission was escorting an Alpha strike against the Hai Duong Railroad Yard. 16 attack aircraft, 8 F-4s flying cover. MiG activity expected heavy. The North Vietnamese scrambled everything they had. Ground controllers were vectoring MiGs toward the strike package from multiple airfields. Kep Phuc Yen, Gia Lam. At least 20 contacts on radar. Maybe more. First engagement 10-12 hours. Cunningham's section, 2 F-4s, encountered 4 MiG-17s climbing through 8,000 feet. The MiGs were in a loose formation, not the tight Soviet-trained spacing from earlier in the war. These pilots looked rushed. Cunningham went pure vertical. Classic Top Gun maneuver. Used the F-4's superior thrust to weight in the climb. The MiG-17 can't follow past 15,000 feet without bleeding all its energy. He pulled up, rolled inverted, looked down. One MiG was trying to follow, stalled, hung there. Cunningham rolled back, dove, fired a sidewinder from above. The MiG exploded. Driscoll called another MiG at their 7 o'clock. Cunningham broke hard left. The MiG overshot. Cunningham reversed into him, another Top Gun technique. The reversal put him on the MiG's tail at 2,000 feet separation. Too close for a sidewinder shot. He closed to 1,500 feet, fired. The missile tracked. Second kill. Then it got complicated. Multiple MiGs converging, radio calls overlapping. Cunningham's wingman was defensive. The strike package was taking fire. Everything happened in about 90 seconds. Cunningham ended up 1 versus 1 with a MiG-17 at low altitude. The pilot was good, better than the first 2. He knew the vertical game, knew energy management. They went through 3 full engagement cycles. Climb, reverse, separate, merge again. Driscoll was calling altitudes and angles. Cunningham was flying the jet at the edge of its performance envelope. The MiG pilot matched him. They were both down to nothing. Low airspeed, low altitude, trying to force the other into a mistake. Cunningham tried something from training. He pulled vertical, cut throttles, deployed speed brakes. The F-4 decelerated violently. The MiG pilot didn't expect it. He shot past. Cunningham got nose on, fired his last sidewinder. The MiG went down. 3 kills, 1 mission. Nobody had done that since Korea. The debrief lasted 4 hours. Intelligence wanted every detail. What maneuvers the MiGs used, how they communicated, whether the third pilot showed different tactics than the first 2. Cunningham described the vertical fight. Driscoll confirmed the timeline. The gun camera footage backed everything up. May 10, 1972 final score. Navy claimed 8 MiG kills, lost 2 aircraft to SAMs. The Air Force got 3 more MiGs in separate engagements. 11 total North Vietnamese losses. One day. The VPAF pulled back immediately. Sortie rates dropped. For the next week, North Vietnamese fighters avoided American strike packages unless ground controllers assessed overwhelming numerical advantage. Even then, they were cautious. By May 18th, the kill ratio for linebacker operations stood at 12.5 American kills for every loss. The Navy's portion was even better. Top Gun graduates were accounting for most of the kills. The training worked exactly as designed. One radio call from May 12th, I found the transcript in Naval Aviation Archives, shows a North Vietnamese ground controller ordering a MiG flight to disengage from F-4s. The phrasing was direct. Return to base, do not engage. That never happened in 1968. Something had changed. The Vietnamese knew it. They just couldn't stop it. The numbers are documented. 1968. Navy F-4s achieved a 2.3 to 1 kill ratio against North Vietnamese fighters. 1972 during Linebacker, 12.5 to 1. Same aircraft, same enemy, different pilots. Top Gun graduates accounted for 36 of the 55 Navy kills between May and October 1972. That's 65% of total kills from pilots who represented maybe 8% of the fighter community. Cunningham and Driscoll got 5. Matt Connolly got 3. Sam Flynn got 2. The names repeat across mission reports. The VPAF couldn't sustain the losses. May 1972, they lost 27 aircraft in air-to-air combat. June was quieter, 11 losses. July, 8. By August, North Vietnamese fighters were avoiding engagements entirely unless they had massive numerical advantage. Ground controllers were keeping MiGs away from American formations that included known Top Gun graduates. I found one CIA assessment from June 1972 that analyzed VPAF radio intercepts. The report noted North Vietnamese controllers using specific call signs to identify American fighters they considered high threat. The assessment speculated this was based on previous engagement outcomes. They were tracking which F-4 crews had killed their pilots and warning others. Soviet advisors documented the problem in reports declassified in 2003. One assessment from July 1972 described VPAF morale as critically degraded. Another noted systematic tactical inferiority against enhanced American training methods. They knew. They couldn't fix it fast enough. Sortie rates tell the story clearer than kill ratios. May 10th through May 15th, VPAF flew 89 sorties against American strikes. May 16th through May 31st, 34 sorties. The Americans were hitting targets daily. Strike packages weren't getting smaller. But the MiGs stopped showing up. Maintenance records, these came from Vietnamese archives via a 2007 academic study, show the 921st Fighter Regiment was operationally combat capable through July 1972. They had aircraft. They had pilots. They chose not to engage. That's defeat without surrender. Here's the detail that goes nowhere. One intercept transcript from May 23, 1972, shows a North Vietnamese ground controller ordering a MiG-21 flight to maintain readiness at 4,000 meters, do not descend, observe only. The F-4S they were observing were from VF-51. The MiGs stayed high. Watch the strike package hit its target. Never engaged. The controller's final transmission was, "Return to base, mission complete." Their mission was watching, that's all. I don't know if that was standard procedure by late May or an isolated incident. The transcript exists. Nobody explains it. By September, the air war had shifted entirely. The VPAF was flying air defense over Hanoi only. They'd ceded everything else. American strike packages operated almost unopposed outside the SAM rings around major cities. When MiGs did engage, they used hit-and-run tactics. One pass, disengage immediately, don't commit to maneuvering fights. The kill ratio stayed lopsided through October, when Linebacker 1 ended. Final numbers: 55 North Vietnamese aircraft destroyed in air combat. 4 American fighters lost to MiGs. The rest of American losses, 24 aircraft total, went to surface-to-air missiles and anti-aircraft fire. Top Gun didn't win the air war alone. American technology helped. Better missiles by 1972. Improved radar. But the F-4 in 1972 was fundamentally the same jet from 1968. The missiles were incrementally better, not revolutionary. What changed was pilot training. The North Vietnamese couldn't adapt. Their doctrine was Soviet. Their training was Soviet. The Soviets built their air combat theory around numerical superiority and acceptable loss rates. Works fine if you're planning for World War III with thousands of aircraft. Doesn't work in limited war, where you've got 120 fighters total and you're losing 3 per week. The Vietnam People's Air Force published internal assessments after the war ended in 1975. Most stayed classified until the 1990s, some longer. A few got declassified when Vietnamese-American academic researchers pushed for access in the 2000s. The documents are brutal. One report from the 921st Fighter Regiment dated August 1972 described linebacker operations as tactically untenable against adversary formations employing advanced maneuvering doctrine. That's the polite version. The report continues for 6 pages analyzing specific engagements where VPAF pilots followed correct procedures and died anyway. The conclusion noted American pilots were demonstrating tactical knowledge inconsistent with previous engagement patterns. They noticed. They couldn't explain it. Another document, this one from November 1972, written by Soviet advisors attached to the VPAF, assessed pilot performance during Linebacker. The language is clinical. Morale degradation became observable in May, coinciding with increased loss rates. Pilots displayed reluctance to engage numerically inferior American formations. Standard tactical responses produced unfavorable outcomes with increasing frequency. The Soviets knew their doctrine wasn't working. They recommended comprehensive tactical retraining and psychological resilience programs. Neither happened before Linebacker 2 started in December. By then it didn't matter. I found one assessment that used the word is baguette, avoid. The context was describing VPAF pilot behavior during late-stage Linebacker 1 operations. Pilots were instructed to avoid extended engagements with American fighters displaying superior maneuvering capability. They were telling their pilots to run from specific F-4s. That's not tactics. That's survival. Here's what frustrates me. The Vietnamese records from May 10th specifically are incomplete. That was the day Cunningham got 3 kills. The day the VPAF lost 12 aircraft total. I wanted to find the North Vietnamese perspective on that engagement. What their pilots reported. What their ground controllers saw. The records either don't exist or they're still classified somewhere in Hanoi. What I found instead were maintenance logs from Kep Airfield covering May 10th to 15th. They're mundane until you read them carefully. May 10th, 7 aircraft returned with battle damage. May 11th, 9 aircraft grounded for repairs. May 12th, 4 aircraft grounded, 2 written off entirely. The maintenance crews were overwhelmed. They couldn't fix jets fast enough. One logistics report from June 1972 noted critical shortages of replacement components for MiG-17 hydraulic systems and MiG-21 radar assemblies. The Soviets were supplying parts but not fast enough to match damage rates. Some aircraft sat grounded for weeks waiting for components. There's a personnel report from July 1972 that lists 23 pilots as temporarily unfit for combat operations due to medical evaluation. That's not wounds. That's psychological. Soviet advisors had a term for it. They called it combat exhaustion in the declassified translations. Pilots who'd survived multiple engagements but couldn't fly anymore. The VPAF tried adapting. They changed tactics in June. New doctrine emphasized hit-and-run attacks, single-pass engagements only, no extended maneuvering, get in, shoot, get out. Some pilots made it work. Nguyen Van Coc, North Vietnam's leading ace, flew exactly this way through Linebacker and survived. But most pilots weren't Nguyen Van Coc. Most were kids with 200 hours total flight time facing American crews with Top Gun training and 1,000 plus hours. The experience gap was insurmountable. One final document worth mentioning, a post-war analysis from 1976 written by VPAF Command Staff. It's surprisingly honest. The authors acknowledge that American pilot training improvements in 1969 to 1972 fundamentally altered the tactical environment and that VPAF responses were insufficient and delayed. They recommend comprehensive training reforms. Those reforms came too late for the pilots, who died in 1972. Nguyen Van Coc survived Linebacker 1 and Linebacker 2, 16 confirmed kills, North Vietnam's leading ace. He flew through May 1972 when the VPAF was losing 3 aircraft per day and came out alive. His last combat mission was December 28, 1972. MiG-21 intercept against B-52s hitting Hanoi. He damaged 1 bomber, his claim, disputed by American records, and returned to Noi Bai airfield with his jet shot full of holes from a tail gunner. He landed. The war ended 6 weeks later. Coc stayed in the Vietnamese Air Force after reunification, flew training missions, eventually stopped flying, became an instructor at the VPAF Academy, later worked in administration. He gave interviews occasionally, always careful, always diplomatic. In 1997, a Western journalist asked him about May 1972, about the period when sortie rates collapsed and VPAF pilots were avoiding American formations. Coc's answer was translated as, "We adjusted our tactics based on observed adversary capabilities," which says everything and nothing. He never met Randy Cunningham. Never wanted to, according to sources who knew him. One Vietnamese pilot who served with Coc said he considered the Americans skilled but didn't dwell on individual opponents. The war was the war. It ended. He moved on. Coc retired from the Air Force in 1990, taught physics at a secondary school in Hanoi for 15 years. He died in 2008. State funeral. Full military honors. The obituaries mentioned his 16 kills. None mentioned May 1972 specifically. Most of the pilots he flew with didn't survive the war. The 921st Fighter Regiment lost 47 pilots between 1965 and 1973, some to surface-to-air missile accidents, some to mechanical failures, most to American fighters. The names are listed on a memorial at Noi Bai airfield. Nguyen Van Bai, the pilot from Section 4 who survived May 10th, isn't on it. He made it through 1972, got shot down in January 1973 by an Air Force F-4, ejected, captured, released during Operation Homecoming. Went back to flying afterwards. The MiG-17 Coc flew during his final mission in December. 1972 is supposedly in a museum in Hanoi. I haven't verified this personally. Multiple sources mention it. Bureau number unknown. The museum displays it with a placard listing Coc's 16 victories. No mention of losses. No mention of May 1972, when his regiment lost 12 aircraft in one day. Soviet advisors left Vietnam in 1973 after the Paris Peace Accords. Their assessments of VPAF performance remained classified until the USSR collapsed. What's been released shows they understood exactly what happened. American training improvements created a capability gap the VPAF couldn't close. Their recommendations for doctrinal reforms went nowhere because the war ended. TOPGUN kept operating after Vietnam, still exists today at TIAS Fallon in Nevada. The curriculum evolved, added more aircraft types, more complex scenarios. But the core principle stayed the same: realistic adversary training against pilots trying to kill you. The kill ratios from 1972 never repeated because the conditions never repeated. No other conflict since Vietnam involved sustained air-to-air combat between near-peer adversaries. Desert Storm had some fighter engagements, but they were one-sided. The Iraqis didn't have